The thing about the galaxy is that it's absolutely crawling with species who think they're at the top of the food chain. Most of them are wrong, of course, but that doesn't stop them from acting like apex predators with attitudes that could power small starships. The Nethak were particularly fond of this delusion. These 8-foot-tall, 4-armed collections of teeth and bad intentions had spent the last few millennia convincing themselves they were the galaxy's premier hunters. They'd turned killing into an art form, complete with rituals, ceremonies, and what could generously be called a professional code. Assuming your definition of professional included torture, terror, and treating sentient beings like particularly challenging game animals, the research vessel Galactic Wanderer had been drifting through the Kepler Nebula for 3 months, its crew blissfully unaware that they'd just become the latest items on a very exclusive menu. Dr. Amanda Harding stood in the biolab, reviewing data streams from the latest planetary scan, her fingers dancing across holographic displays with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent the better part of a decade studying alien ecosystems. "Mama, look what Phantom caught." 8-year-old Willa Harding burst through the lab doors, her auburn hair bouncing as she skipped forward. In her arms sat what most people would generously call a fluffy death machine. A Wolverine roughly the size of a medium dog, his dark fur streaked with silver markings that seemed to shimmer under the ship's artificial lighting. Phantom yawned, displaying teeth that could probably open a can of whatever passed for food on distant worlds, then promptly closed his eyes and began what appeared to be a very serious nap. The picture of domestic tranquility, really. "What did he catch this time, sweetheart?" Amanda asked, though she had a sneaking suspicion it involved the ship's automated cleaning drones. "Again." 3 maintenance bots and a sensor probe," Willa announced proudly, scratching behind Phantom's ears. The Wolverine's response was a contented rumble that vibrated through his entire body. "He's getting really good at the hunting games you programmed." Amanda smiled, though something cold touched her spine. Those weren't games exactly. The hunting exercises she'd designed for Phantom were training protocols, genetic triggers embedded deep in his enhanced DNA. But Willa didn't need to know that. Not yet. The universe, however, had other plans for family bonding time. The ship's emergency klaxons began wailing with all the subtlety of a dying whale, and the lights shifted to that special shade of red that universally meant things have gone spectacularly wrong. Amanda's hands flew to her workstation, pulling up external sensor data that made her blood turn to ice water. "Contact, bearing 28 Mark 6, came the captain's voice over the intercom, tight with barely controlled fear. "Multiple vessels, configuration unknown. They're not responding to hails." On the main display, 3 sleek ships materialized from the nebula's swirling gases like predators emerging from tall grass. Their hulls were a matte black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and their design spoke of one thing: violence. These weren't exploration vessels or cargo haulers. These were ships built for a single purpose, and that purpose was making other ships very, very dead. "Nethak," Amanda whispered, the word falling from her lips like a curse. Willa looked up from where she'd been playing with Phantom's paws. "What's a Nethak?" Before Amanda could answer, the ship lurched violently to starboard, throwing both of them against the bulkhead. Emergency lighting flickered, and somewhere in the distance, metal screamed against metal. Phantom's eyes snapped open, suddenly alert, his entire demeanor shifting from sleepy pet to something far more dangerous. "Mama?" Willa's voice was small now, uncertain. "It's okay, baby." Amanda pulled her daughter close, her mind racing. The Nethak were legends. Bogeymen that deep space crews whispered about in the darkest corners of frontier bars. But the legends all agreed on one thing. Once they decided to hunt you, running was just a way of making the chase more interesting. The intercom crackled to life again. "All hands, this is Captain Morrison. We are being boarded. Repeat, we are being boarded. All civilian personnel report to designated safe areas immediately." Amanda's blood turned to liquid nitrogen. Safe areas. As if there was such a thing when the Nethak came calling. "Listen to me, Willa." Amanda knelt down, gripping her daughter's shoulders. "Remember the emergency protocols we practiced? The ones you thought were silly games?" Willa nodded, her green eyes wide with fear but still trusting. Still believing that Mama could fix anything. "I need you to take Phantom and go to the secondary biolab. Lock the doors, activate the containment protocols, and don't open them for anyone except me or Daddy. Do you understand?" "But what about you?" Amanda kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. "I'll be right behind you. I just need to secure the research data." It was a lie, of course. Amanda had no intention of following her daughter into that lab. The Nethak would be looking for the crew, and every second Amanda could buy by leading them away from Willa was worth whatever happened next. Willa seemed to sense the deception, but she nodded anyway. She scooped up Phantom, who had grown notably heavier and more alert in the past few minutes, and headed for the secondary lab. At the doorway, she turned back. "Mama? Phantom feels different. Like he's waiting for something." Before Amanda could respond, the main lab doors exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Through the smoke stepped something that nightmares would use as inspiration. The Nethak warrior stood 8 feet tall, his forearms ending in claws that could probably carve their names in starship hull plating. His skin was a mottled gray-green, stretched over muscles that belonged on something designed for breaking things, and his eyes, all 4 of them, glowed with the satisfied hunger of a predator who'd found fresh prey. Behind him came 2 more, equally charming specimens of what happened when evolution decided that subtle was overrated. "Dr. Amanda Harding," the lead warrior said in accented standard, his voice like gravel in a blender. "You are the xenobiologist, yes? The one who studies how things live?" His mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Today, you study how things die." Amanda straightened, forcing steel into her spine. "If you're here for the research data, you can have it. Just leave my crew alone." The Nethak's laugh was like breaking glass. "Oh, little human, you misunderstand. We are not here for your data. We are here for sport." His 4 eyes fixed on the doorway where Willa had disappeared. "And cubs always make the hunt more interesting." That's when Amanda realized that the emergency protocols she'd drilled into Willa weren't going to be enough. The containment lab where she'd sent her daughter wasn't a safe room. It was a trap. "Now," the Nethak continued, his claws clicking against his weapon harness, "where is the little one? And more importantly?" His eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Where is her companion?" Our sensors detected something quite unusual about that creature. Amanda's heart hammered against her ribs. They knew about Phantom. Somehow, they knew. In the secondary biolab, Willa pressed her back against the sealed door, clutching Phantom tight against her chest. The Wolverine's muscles were tense, coiled like springs, and she could feel his heartbeat racing against hers. Whatever was happening out there, Phantom understood it better than she did. "It's okay, boy," she whispered into his fur. "Mama said to wait here. She'll come get us." But even as she said the words, Willa could hear the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. Heavy footsteps. Too many of them. Phantom's growl was so low it was almost subsonic, a rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his genetic memory. His lips pulled back from his teeth, and for the first time in her young life, Willa realized that her fluffy companion might not be quite what she thought he was. The footsteps stopped outside the lab door. "Little human cub," a voice called through the reinforced steel, honey-sweet and absolutely terrifying. "We know you are in there, and we know what you have with you." Willa's breath caught in her throat. Phantom's growl intensified, and she could swear she felt his muscles expanding under her hands. "Open the door, little one. Make this easier for everyone." Willa looked down at Phantom, whose yellow eyes met hers with an intelligence that suddenly seemed far more complex than any pet should possess. "What are you?" she whispered. Phantom's answering growl suggested she was about to find out. Outside the lab, Ulthon, Huntmaster of the Nethak Warpack Bloodwake, studied the sealed door with professional interest. Inside, he could smell fear. Child fear, which was always the sweetest. But there was something else, something that made his hunter's instincts prickle with anticipation. The creature the human cub carried wasn't showing up properly on their sensors. Oh, they could detect it, but the readings were confused, contradictory, as if whatever was in there was somehow more than their instruments could properly categorize. "Shall we cut through the door, Huntmaster?" asked one of his subordinates. Ulthon's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Number. Where is the sport in that? The cub will open it herself, once she realizes there is nowhere else to run." He gestured to his warriors, who began placing shaped charges around the lab's secondary exits. Emergency ventilation shafts, maintenance tunnels, even the waste disposal chute. Every possible escape route was systematically sealed. Besides, Ulthon continued, his four eyes gleaming with anticipation, "I am curious about this companion of hers. Our preliminary scans detected genetic markers that don't appear in any known database. Enhanced muscle density, modified nervous system, accelerated healing factors." He paused, savoring the moment. Someone has been very busy in their laboratories. The question is, were they breeding a pet or a weapon? Inside the lab, Willa pressed her ear to the door, listening to the sound of metal being welded shut. One by one, every exit was being blocked. They weren't just trapped. They were being methodically, professionally cornered. Phantom had gone very still in her arms, but it wasn't the stillness of sleep or contentment. It was the stillness of something waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. "I'm scared, Phantom," Willa whispered. The Wolverine turned his head to look at her, and for just a moment, Willa could have sworn she saw something almost human in those yellow eyes. Understanding, purpose, and perhaps most terrifying of all, anticipation. Outside, Ulthon finished his preparations and stepped back to admire his work. The little human cub was sealed in her metal box with nowhere to run. Soon, she would realize that her only choice was to open the door and face her fate with whatever dignity an 8-year-old could muster. It would be a good hunt. Brief, perhaps, but satisfying. What Ulthon didn't realize, what none of the Nethak understood, was that they hadn't cornered a frightened child and her pet. They had just activated a weapon that had been sleeping for 8 years, waiting for exactly this moment. And Phantom was finally awake. Here's a fun fact about assumptions. They have a nasty habit of getting you killed in the most embarrassing ways possible. The Nethak, for all their supposed hunting prowess, were about to learn this lesson in a way that would require significant updates to their species' medical textbooks, assuming any of them lived long enough to write them. Ulthon stood outside the sealed biolab, practically vibrating with anticipation. In his considerable experience, trapped prey went through predictable stages: denial, bargaining, acceptance, and finally that delicious moment of despair when they realized death was inevitable. He'd timed it perfectly with hundreds of species across dozens of worlds. What he hadn't counted on was dealing with humans. But then again, most species made that mistake exactly once. Inside the lab, Willa held Phantom against her chest, feeling his heartbeat synchronize with hers in a way that should have been impossible. The Wolverine had stopped growling, but somehow that was infinitely more terrifying than the sound had been. It was like the moment before lightning strikes, all that deadly energy just waiting for the perfect moment to unleash itself. "Little cub," Ulthon's voice drifted through the reinforced door, dripping with false kindness. "We grow impatient. Perhaps we should visit your parents first? I believe we have them in holding cell. Oh, what do you humans call it? Number 5? Willa's blood turned to ice, but Phantom's response was immediate and visceral. Every muscle in his compact body went rigid, and she could swear she felt his bones shifting, expanding. His breathing changed, becoming deeper, more controlled, like a machine powering up for maximum efficiency. "That's right, little one. They're still alive, for now. But hunting is so much more interesting when there are stakes involved." The lock on the lab door began to glow cherry red as plasma cutters started their work from the outside. Willa looked around frantically for another way out, but the Nethak had been thorough. Every vent, every maintenance hatch, every possible escape route had been sealed with military precision. "Phantom," she whispered, "what do I do?" The Wolverine lifted his head and looked directly into her eyes. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Willa saw something that made her 8-year-old brain struggle to process what she was witnessing. Those weren't the eyes of a pet, or even a particularly intelligent animal. They were the eyes of a soldier receiving orders. The door's lock finally gave way with a shower of sparks and molten metal. As it hissed open, revealing the corridor beyond, Ulthon stepped forward with the confidence of a predator who'd never encountered anything he couldn't kill. "There you are, little cub. Such a fuss over—" That's when Phantom moved. Now, if you've never seen an enhanced Wolverine in full combat mode, consider yourself fortunate. Most people who witness it don't live long enough to need therapy afterward. Phantom launched himself from Willa's arms like a furry missile, covering the distance to the doorway in a blur of motion that the Nethak's 4 eyes couldn't quite track. He hit the first warrior at chest level. 40 pounds of genetically modified fury, backed by muscles that could generate enough force to dent starship plating. The impact sent the 8-foot-tall alien stumbling backward, mandibles clicking in shock and pain, as claws that could carve through reinforced steel found the weak spots in his armor. "What?" was all Ulthon managed before Phantom ricocheted off his subordinate and launched himself at the Huntmaster's throat. Here's where things got really interesting. The Nethak had evolved as apex predators on a world where everything wanted to kill everything else, usually before breakfast. They were fast, strong, and had reflexes that could put most combat AIs to shame. Phantom was faster. The Wolverine twisted in midair, avoiding Ulthon's frantically grasping claws by mere millimeters, and landed on the Huntmaster's shoulders. For a split second, Predator stared into the eyes of something that evolution had specifically designed to kill predators. Then, Phantom's teeth found the neural cluster at the base of Ulthon's skull. The Huntmaster's roar of pain and rage shook the corridor as he spun, trying to dislodge his attacker. But Phantom had clamped on with the tenacity of something that had been bred for exactly this purpose, and he wasn't letting go until his job was finished. The second Nethak warrior, recovering from his impact with the bulkhead, raised his plasma rifle and tried to get a clean shot. That's when he discovered that Phantom wasn't just fast and strong, he was tactically brilliant. The Wolverine released his grip on Ulthon and dropped to the deck plating just as the warrior fired. The plasma bolt meant for Phantom caught the Huntmaster square in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the wall with a sound like a small building collapsing. Before the shooter could realize his mistake, Phantom was already moving again, using the corridor's narrow confines to his advantage. He bounced off the walls like a living pinball, creating angles of attack that the Nethak's training had never prepared them for. "Sound the alarm!" Ulthon gasped, green blood streaming from his wounds. "Full warpack mobilization!" But his subordinates were rapidly discovering that alarms were difficult to sound when you were busy trying not to die. Phantom had turned the corridor into his personal hunting ground, and the Nethak, for the first time in their species' proud history, found themselves on the wrong end of the predator-prey relationship. The third warrior lasted exactly 18 seconds. The fourth managed nearly 30, mainly because he'd had the presence of mind to retreat toward the cargo bay, where there was more room to maneuver. Unfortunately for him, more room just meant more creative angles for Phantom to exploit. Willa, meanwhile, had not been idle. While her companion was busy redefining the Nethak's understanding of the food chain, she'd been accessing the ship's computer systems using protocols her parents had taught her just for fun. Funny how fun educational games suddenly became survival tools. Her small fingers flew over the holographic interface, activating security lockdowns, environmental controls, and every automated defense system the research vessel possessed. The ship's AI, recognizing her biometric signature and emergency authorization codes, began sealing off sections of the vessel and activating containment protocols. "Phantom!" she called out. "Mama's lab! The emergency kit!" The Wolverine's head snapped around at her voice, and she could swear she saw him nod before he began herding the surviving Nethak warriors away from the biolab and toward the ship's central corridor. It wasn't random violence, it was a coordinated tactical maneuver. Ulthon, clutching his wounded shoulder, finally began to understand what they were dealing with. The creature wasn't just enhanced, it was engineered, purpose-built. And the human cub wasn't some helpless victim cowering in fear. She was the Wolverine's mission handler. "Retreat!" he barked into his communicator. "All units, fall back to the ship." But retreating from Phantom turned out to be like trying to outrun a guided missile with anger management issues. The Wolverine had identified the Nethak as threats to his handler, and his programming was very specific about what happened to threats. They were to be eliminated, efficiently, thoroughly, and with extreme prejudice. The chase that followed would later be studied in military academies across 3 sectors as a master class in how superior numbers and equipment meant absolutely nothing when facing an opponent who'd been genetically designed to turn your advantages into weaknesses. Phantom used the ship's ventilation system, maintenance shafts, and even the garbage chutes to appear wherever the Nethak least expected him. He was everywhere and nowhere, a shadow with teeth that struck without warning and vanished before retaliation was possible. One by one, the Huntmaster's warriors fell, not killed. Phantom was too smart for that. Dead enemies couldn't spread fear. Instead, he left them alive but broken, traumatized survivors who would carry stories of the demon cub's shadow beast back to their homeworld. Assuming, of course, that any of them made it home at all. Willa, working with the focused intensity of someone whose family's lives depended on her 8-year-old technical skills, had managed to access her mother's research files. What she found there made her stomach clench with a mixture of terror and hope. Files marked with her name, genetic sequences, enhancement protocols, and at the center of it all, detailed schematics of something called Project Guardian. Phantom wasn't just her pet. He was her bodyguard, her protector, her genetically engineered companion designed specifically to keep one small human girl safe in a galaxy full of things that wanted to hurt her. And right now, he was doing exactly what he'd been created to do. The Huntmaster's retreat became a rout when Phantom appeared in the main corridor ahead of his remaining warriors, blocking their path to the docking bay. The Wolverine stood in the center of the passageway, no longer the cute, sleepy pet from an hour ago. This was something else entirely. Something that had been waiting 8 years for exactly this moment. His fur had darkened to an almost perfect black, and his eyes reflected the corridor lights like amber mirrors. Muscles rippled under his coat with every breath, and when he opened his mouth, the sound that emerged wasn't quite a growl and wasn't quite a roar. It was a promise. Ulthon looked at his remaining warriors, 3 of them, battered and bleeding, then at the creature blocking their escape route. In his 4 eyes, the Huntmaster saw his own death reflected in triplicate. "What are you?" he whispered. Phantom's only answer was to lower his head and bunch his muscles for the final charge. Behind him, Willa's voice echoed through the ship's intercom system, sweet and innocent and absolutely terrifying in its complete lack of fear. "You shouldn't have threatened my mama and daddy." That's when Ulthon realized that humans hadn't been entirely honest about what they considered household pets. And it was far, far too late to renegotiate the terms of this particular hunt. There's an old saying among deep space miners: the moment you think you understand the universe, it finds new and creative ways to prove you wrong, usually involving explosions and existential terror. The Nethak were about to become a living testament to this wisdom, assuming any of them survived the next 20 minutes. Ulthon stared down the corridor at the creature that had single-handedly dismantled his elite hunting pack, and a thought occurred to him that would have been hilarious under different circumstances. Maybe the humans hadn't been completely forthcoming about their domestic animal policies. "Fall back to the ship," he commanded his remaining warriors through gritted mandibles. Emergency evacuation protocols. It was, perhaps, the first intelligent decision he'd made all day. Unfortunately for the Huntmaster, Phantom had other plans. The Wolverine's charge was poetry in motion, if poetry involved 40 pounds of genetically modified fury, moving at speeds that violated several laws of physics. He hit the first warrior low, severing tendons with surgical precision, then rebounded off the bulkhead to take down the second, before the first had even finished falling. The third warrior, demonstrating survival instincts that his species had clearly evolved for good reason, turned and ran toward the docking bay at a speed that would have been impressive if it hadn't been completely pointless. Phantom let him go. After all, someone needed to spread the word about what happened when you threatened human cubs. Ulthon found himself alone in the corridor with something that his considerable hunting experience couldn't properly categorize. It moved like a predator, fought like a soldier, and planned like a tactician. Worse yet, it was obviously holding back, playing with him, rather than simply ending the threat he represented. "What are you?" he demanded again, his forearms spreading in a defensive posture that would have intimidated a small tank. Phantom tilted his head with an expression that somehow managed to convey both amusement and contempt. Then he did something that made Ulthan's blood freeze in his veins. He smiled. Not the facial expression that some species used to indicate friendliness or contentment. This was something altogether more primal, the baring of teeth that evolution had spent millions of years perfecting for one specific purpose: removing threats to one's pack. Meanwhile, back in the biolab, Willa had been busy turning her mother's research vessel into the galaxy's most unlikely fortress. The files she'd accessed revealed capabilities built into the ship's systems that no 8-year-old should have been able to understand, let alone operate. But then again, Willa wasn't exactly a typical 8-year-old. Her parents had spent years preparing her for life among the stars, teaching her ship operations disguised as games, survival skills masked as family activities, and tactical thinking presented as puzzles. At the time, she'd thought it was just because they wanted her to follow in their scientific footsteps. Now she realized they'd been preparing her for exactly this moment. "Computer," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting in the corridors around her. "Access Mama's private research files. Authorization: Willa Guardian Alpha 9. The ship's AI responded immediately. "Authorization confirmed. Welcome, Willa. Guardian protocols are now active. How may I assist you?" Guardian protocols. The same name as the project files about Phantom. Her parents hadn't just enhanced her pet. They'd turned their entire ship into a protective system designed around keeping their daughters safe. "Show me the Nethak ship's position and structural data." Holographic displays materialized around her, showing detailed schematics of the alien vessel currently attached to their hull like a parasitic nightmare. But these weren't just basic external scans. The computer had somehow accessed the Nethak ship's internal systems and was providing real-time data on everything from power distribution to atmospheric composition. "How are you reading their internal systems?" Willa asked, though part of her was afraid she already knew the answer. "Your parents installed several unofficial modifications to our sensor array during the past year. They were very specific about maintaining the ability to gather intelligence on potential threats." Willa's parents, it turned out, had been planning for this possibility for quite some time. The research vessel Galactic Wanderer wasn't just a science ship. It was a floating early warning system and defensive platform disguised as academic curiosity. And right now, it was very, very angry. "Computer, what can we do to disable the Nethak ship?" Analyzing, the Nethak vessel's primary weakness appears to be their neural interface systems. Their entire crew is connected to their ship through bio-neural implants that amplify their natural hunting instincts. However, this creates a significant vulnerability. The holographic display shifted, highlighting specific frequency ranges and harmonic patterns. A properly calibrated sonic pulse at these frequencies would cause severe disruption to their nervous systems, potentially incapacitating the entire crew. Willa stared at the data, her mind racing. "Can our communication array generate those frequencies?" "With modifications, yes. However, the process would require someone to manually calibrate the transmitter from the communications bay." The communications bay, which was currently between her and Phantom, and crawling with the remaining Nethak boarding party. "Can Phantom understand complex instructions?" Guardian enhancement protocols include advanced cognitive augmentation. Phantom's current intelligence baseline is approximately equivalent to that of a gifted human adult, with tactical processing capabilities that exceed most military AIs. Willa felt her worldview shift slightly. Her cuddly pet Wolverine was apparently smarter than her high school math teacher. Patch me through to Phantom's comm implant. Connection established. Phantom, she said, hoping the communication system worked both ways. I need you to get to the communications bay. I'm going to guide you through disabling their ship. In the corridor outside, Phantom's ears perked up at the sound of Willa's voice coming through the tiny receiver implanted behind his left ear. His amber eyes fixed on Ulthon with renewed intensity. The Huntmaster, recognizing that look from 1,000 successful kills, began backing toward the docking bay. You're not just enhanced, you're networked. The Cub is your mission controller. Phantom's answering growl confirmed the Huntmaster's worst fears. This wasn't a simple guard animal. It was a living weapon system with tactical support and strategic coordination. The Nethak were fighting a war, and they hadn't even realized it until they were already losing. Phantom, Willa's voice continued, the communications bay is 3 sections ahead of your current position. There are 2 more Nethak between you and the objective. 2 more Nethak. Ulthon did quick mental math and realized that his boarding party had been reduced from 12 elite warriors to himself and 2 survivors in less than 30 minutes by a single enhanced animal and an 8-year-old girl. His species' military historians were going to have a field day with this disaster. Move to objective, Willa instructed. I'll guide you through the technical procedures once you're in position. Phantom padded forward with the confidence of something that had already calculated the most efficient way to neutralize every threat between himself and his goal. Ulthon found himself pressed against the bulkhead as the Wolverine approached, those amber eyes never leaving his face. For a moment that felt like an eternity, predator and prey stared at each other. Then Phantom did something that would haunt Ulthon's nightmares for the rest of his considerably shortened life expectancy. He winked. Then he was past the Huntmaster and moving toward the communications bay with purposeful strides, leaving Ulthon alive for reasons that had everything to do with psychological warfare and nothing to do with mercy. The 2 remaining Nethak warriors in the communications section had barricaded themselves behind overturned equipment, their plasma rifles trained on the entrance. They'd heard the sounds of combat echoing through the ship's corridors and had made the entirely reasonable decision to establish a defensive position and wait for backup. What they hadn't counted on was facing an opponent who had spent 8 years studying every inch of the ship's layout and could navigate its maintenance systems with the ease of someone strolling through their own backyard. Phantom appeared in the communications bay through a ventilation grate that should have been too small for anything larger than a maintenance drone. The Nethak had approximately 2 seconds to register his presence before he was among them, moving like liquid death through their defensive positions. The first warrior managed to get off a single shot that left a scorch mark on the bulkhead 6 inches from where Phantom had been a millisecond earlier. The second didn't even get that far. Communications bay secured, Willa announced through the ship's intercom, monitoring the situation through internal sensors. Phantom, approach the primary transmitter array. I'm going to walk you through the modifications. What followed was perhaps the most surreal technical support session in galactic history. An 8-year-old girl providing detailed engineering instructions to a genetically enhanced Wolverine who followed them with the precision of a trained technician. Use your claws to remove the panel marked with the blue triangle. No, your other left. There you go. Phantom's enhanced anatomy included retractable claws that could be used with surprising delicacy when required. He stripped away protective panels, rerouted power couplings, and adjusted frequency modulators with an efficiency that would have impressed starship engineers across the galaxy. Now connect the red wire to the blue conduit. Perfect. You're smarter than Daddy's graduate students. On the Nethak ship, alarms began wailing as their bio-neural networks started detecting something very wrong with the electromagnetic environment around them. The frequency signature their sensors were picking up shouldn't have been possible. No known species had ever weaponized sonic harmonics at this level of sophistication. "Hunt, Master!" came a panicked voice over the intercom. "Our neural interface systems are showing massive instability. Recommend immediate disconnection from ship's network." Ulthon, still pressed against the bulkhead where Phantom had left him, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. If the humans could disrupt bio-neural networks, they could potentially incapacitate his entire crew without firing a single shot. "How long until the modifications are complete?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Sir, the human vessel is generating harmonic frequencies that are interfering with our—" The tactical officer's report was cut short, as every bio-neural implant on the Nethak ship simultaneously activated their emergency disconnection protocols. One by one, the alien warriors found themselves severed from their ship's systems, their enhanced reflexes and tactical coordination reduced to baseline organic capabilities. For a species that had spent centuries integrating technology with biology to create the perfect hunters, it was like suddenly being struck blind and deaf. "Phantom." Willa's voice carried a note of satisfaction that would have been adorable if it hadn't been accompanied by the systematic dismantling of an alien war machine. "Activate the transmission array. Full power." The Wolverine's claw found the activation switch, and the Galactic Wanderer's communication array began broadcasting a precisely calibrated sonic pulse that turned the Nethak ship's greatest strength into its most crippling weakness. On the alien vessel, warriors who had terrorized dozens of species across multiple star systems suddenly found themselves curled on the deck, their nervous systems overloaded by the very technology that had made them apex predators. "Sir," Phantom's enhanced hearing picked up the panicked transmissions between the ships, "our crew is incapacitated. Neural feedback is causing cascade failures throughout all biosystems." Ulthon realized with crystalline clarity that he was witnessing something unprecedented in his species' proud military history. They were being comprehensively defeated by a research vessel crewed by scientists and defended by a single human cub and her pet. The worst part was that it was probably going to make a really embarrassing entry in the military archives. "All units," he transmitted on emergency frequencies, "abandon ship. Repeat, abandon ship. Mark this system as prohibited space." But his transmission was cut short as Phantom appeared in the corridor once again, moving with the patient confidence of someone who had already won and was simply deciding how long to let his opponents realize it. The Wolverine sat down in the middle of the passageway, wrapped his tail around his paws, and waited. Willa's voice echoed through both ships' intercom systems. "You can go now. But if you ever come back, Phantom won't be so nice next time." Ulthon looked at the creature that had single-handedly destroyed his hunting pack and realized that what they'd just experienced had been the nice version of whatever the humans had created. He really didn't want to find out what the mean version looked like. Ulthon's retreat wasn't tactical. It was pure, unadulterated panic, dressed up in whatever dignity he could salvage from the smoking wreckage of his professional reputation. His remaining warriors stumbled through the docking tube like refugees fleeing a natural disaster, which, in a way, they were. Phantom was definitely a force of nature, just one that evolution had specifically designed to end the careers of overconfident predators. "Disconnect all docking clamps," Ulthon ordered, his voice hoarse from breathing recycled air that still carried the scent of his own fear. "Emergency burn! Get us away from that thing." The Nethak ship Blood Wake disengaged from the research vessel with all the grace of a drunk tourist falling off a space station. Behind them, the galactic wanderer hung in space like nothing particularly interesting had happened, its sensor arrays tracking their departure with the casual attention of someone watching paint dry. Which, considering what they'd just witnessed, was probably the most terrifying response possible. On the human ship, Willa sat in the communications bay with Phantom sprawled across her lap, back to being a sleepy Wolverine who looked like he'd never heard anything more dangerous than a sandwich. The transformation was so complete that anyone watching would have assumed the past 2 hours had been some kind of shared hallucination. "Willa!" Dr. Amanda Harding's voice echoed through the ship's corridors as she ran toward the communications bay, having been released from the holding cells the moment the Nethak boarding party had retreated. "Willa, are you all right?" The biolab doors hissed open to reveal her daughter, sitting calmly in the middle of what looked like a small-scale war zone, technical panels scattered around her feet, and her supposedly harmless pet purring contentedly in her arms. "Hi, Mama," Willa said, with the kind of innocent smile that parents learn to fear. "Phantom and I fixed the mean aliens." Amanda knelt beside her daughter, checking for injuries while her scientist's mind tried to process the impossible scene around her. The communications array had been completely rebuilt, power couplings rerouted with surgical precision, and frequency modulators adjusted to specifications that shouldn't have been possible without a full engineering team. "Sweetheart," Amanda said carefully, "how exactly did you and Phantom fix the aliens?" "Well, I found your secret files about Project Guardian, and then Phantom woke up properly, and then we made their ship sick by singing the wrong songs at them." Amanda's blood pressure spiked as she realized her 8-year-old daughter had not only accessed classified research data, but had successfully implemented military-grade countermeasures against a species that most of the galaxy considered unstoppable. "The files were supposed to be encrypted," she muttered. "They were," Willa said brightly. "But you taught me about pattern recognition, remember? Your password was my birthday backwards plus Phantom's genetic sequence identifier." Amanda made a mental note to have a very serious conversation with her husband about operational security, and possibly about their daughter's apparently supernatural ability to turn educational games into survival skills. Dr. Marcus Harding chose that moment to arrive, looking like someone who'd spent the past 2 hours assuming he was about to become an alien snack. He stopped short at the sight of his wife and daughter sitting peacefully in the middle of what appeared to be a technology exhibition. "What happened?" he asked. "The Nethak just left. Their ship looked like it was having some kind of systems failure." "Willa happened," Amanda said, still trying to wrap her mind around the situation. "She activated the Guardian protocols." Marcus's face went pale. The Guardian protocols weren't supposed to be activated until Willa was at least 16 and had completed the advanced tactical training they'd planned for her teenage years. The fact that she'd not only accessed them but successfully implemented them at age 8 suggested that their careful educational timeline might have been slightly off. "How much does she know?" he asked quietly. "Phantom's really smart," Willa announced, apparently having overheard the question. "Like, scary smart. And you've been teaching me spy stuff my whole life, haven't you?" Amanda and Marcus exchanged the kind of look that parents share when they realize their child has figured out something they were planning to explain gradually over the next decade. "Sweetheart," Marcus said, sitting down beside his family, "your mother and I work for more than just the university. The research we do, It's important for keeping humans safe in a galaxy that isn't always friendly. I know, Willa said matter-of-factly. Phantom told me. Phantom told you? Willa scratched behind the Wolverine's ears, and for just a moment, Amanda could swear she saw something almost human flicker behind those amber eyes. He doesn't talk with words, Willa explained, but he shares pictures and feelings through the neural link. He showed me memories of being made in the lab, and learning about bad aliens, and waiting for the day when he'd need to protect me properly. Amanda felt her worldview shift slightly. They'd designed Phantom to be the perfect guardian for their daughter, but apparently they'd underestimated just how perfect that relationship would become. And now the mean aliens know not to bother human children, Willa continued, with the satisfaction of someone who'd just solved a particularly complex puzzle. Phantom made sure they'll tell everyone else about what happens when you threaten human cubs. 3 hours later, Marcus was on a secure communication link with Human Defense Command, filing a report that he knew was going to result in some very interesting policy discussions. Sir, I need to update the threat assessment protocols for human civilian vessels, he said to the Admiral on the other end of the transmission. It appears our distributed Guardian program is more effective than initially projected. How effective? A single 8-year-old and her companion animal successfully neutralized an entire Nethak warpack and disabled their ship without casualties on our side. The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded major revisions to military doctrine. Did you say 8 years old? Yes, sir. I think we may need to reconsider our assumptions about when the enhanced children are ready for activation. Meanwhile, on the Nethak homeworld, Ulthon faced a council of huntmasters who were having considerable difficulty believing his report. The idea that the galaxy's apex predators had been defeated by something the humans called a pet was challenging several fundamental assumptions about the natural order of things. "You're certain this creature was enhanced?" asked the first huntmaster. "Sir, it demonstrated tactical awareness, technical proficiency, and combat effectiveness that exceeded our best warriors, and it was clearly operating under the control of a human cub, who couldn't have been more than 8 standard years old." The council exchanged glances that suggested Ulthon's career prospects had taken a significant downturn. "Recommendation," the first huntmaster asked finally. "Mark human space as forbidden territory," Ulthon said without hesitation. "If this is what they consider a household companion, I don't want to know what they consider military assets." And so it was that humanity earned its first official recognition as a species not to be trifled with, courtesy of one small girl and her genetically enhanced best friend. Willa, blissfully unaware that she'd just rewritten several civilizations' military handbooks, fell asleep that night with Phantom curled up beside her bed, standing guard over dreams filled with starships and adventures yet to come. In the morning, he'd go back to being her cuddly pet Wolverine, playing games and napping in sunny spots. But somewhere in the depths of his enhanced mind, Phantom would always be watching, waiting, ready to remind the galaxy that human children were under the protection of something far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. And that was exactly how Amanda and Dr. Marcus Harding had planned it.